we looked at all the cool features that DevTest Labs have to offer. Now let's look at the automation capabilities that DevTest Labs enable. We'll get right into a demo. What we'll see in the demo is the integration of GitHub with DevTest Labs. You could integrate it with team services as well. We'll look at the workflow of creating a virtual machine within a DevTest Lab. And as we do that, the ARM template that gets generated is something we can use to our advantage. So we'll take that ARM template into GitHub or team services. And from that point onwards, we will create a pipeline that we can use to provision infrastructure deployment within DevTest Labs. All right, so without further ado, I will flip into the Azure portal. All right, so let's get started with a demo. I'm back in the Azure portal. I'm back in the lab. If I scroll down to the settings section where I have the option for configuration and policies and scroll down to repositories, you see I have a public repository that's already associated to the lab. Now, if I click on the public repository, I can see this is backed by a Git endpoint. Let's copy this endpoint and browse to it. Now we can see this is the Azure DevTest Lab GitHub repository where they're creating certain artifacts. Now these artifacts allow you to perform certain jobs. For example, let's look at some of these that are available, like Windows Chrome. So as part of the machine provisioning process, if you wanted to install Google Chrome on the machine, then you could simply attach this artifact into your machine creation process, and it will, at the time of bootstrapping, provision the VM and then layer Google Chrome on top of it. There are a lot of other assets, artifacts that are available, but you're probably going to very quickly start to wonder new opportunities for introducing new artifacts. And some of them might be very specific to your organization that you wouldn't want to open source, that you may just want to develop within VSTS yourself. Um, so there's a way for attaching those artifacts within the DevTest Lab as well, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you here. Is I'm going to click Add, and let's call this IAC Training repository. And I've got a Git endpoint here where I've created these artifacts. So I'm just going to simply put it in. I have to specify the branch. So my assets are living in the master branch, so I'll just enter that. I need to provide a personal access token, and I will put that in here. And that's for the purposes of authentication. And then I just need to specify where within that Git repository do I have the artifact and the resource group templates available. Um, the artifacts are available in this folder, and the templates are available in this folder. Let's click on Save. Behind the scenes, it's just validating the connectivity using the pad token that I've specified, connecting to make sure that this is a valid folder path and that the templates actually exist at this path. Now it's starting the process of caching the templates that are available in this location and making them available within the DevTest Lab. So while this is happening in the background, let me actually show you the repository and what I have there. This is the repository. Within the repository, I have two folders, the artifacts folder and the template folder. The artifact folder is where I have created certain artifacts for deploying my pseudo application Fabricam into production, for creating an interface which does something, created a Jenkins project. And, there's really no end to how many artifacts you can define. You just basically need to define an artifact, a JSON file, which specifies what operating system it's meant for, some description of what the artifact does. And when you attach it with DevTest Lab, it basically looks at this JSON template to work out where in the artifact library it's going to sit, or on what situations it's gonna show up. So if we go back into the lab, and now if we go into the process of creating a new virtual machine within the lab, and we'll do that by going into the lab and pressing Add, I should see the marketplace images, but along with that, I should see other templates as well and some formulas. Let's ignore the templates and the formulas, and let's just select from the marketplace a Windows 10 image. Now let's call it IAC Training Demo 04. IAC Training Demo 4. Let's put in the username. I'll put in a password here. Again, in a real world scenario, I would probably use the key vault secret store that's available with the lab. You have some options to specify what the disk type could be, what size of VM you want to create, and then the artifacts that I talked about are available. So if I click on the artifacts here, I can not only see the one which, my private repository, I can see the one that I just added here, the IAC training repository, but I can also see the public repository. So if I wanted to search for things like Chrome, uh, I can add them. And if I wanted to install, for example, .NET, then that's available. So, there are a lot of options available. Now, the great thing is that while not all the artifacts are there, DevTest Labs quite nicely integrates with Chocolatey as well. So if you go on Chocolatey, you'll find a world of open source packages that are already available there. So if you go into packages and search for example, Java, there's a Java SE runtime available there. So rather than create a separate artifact for it, you can come back into the dev test lab, look for Chocolatey, just there we go, install Chocolatey, and then it's saying which package from the Chocolatey library do you want to install. So I could just simply say JR8 and click add. So what it would do is, because there's native integration available with Chocolatey, behind the scenes it will connect with it, download this package, and deploy it on top of the VM as part of the provisioning process. So that's that. Let's click OK. Now, you have the advanced settings here. Now, this, I think, has some pretty cool features to offer. For example, you have the option of automatic delete, which means you can set a time box for when this virtual machine should automatically delete itself. So for example, I'm just using this VM for purposes of demo, and I don't want to have to come back later to clean this virtual machine up. What I'll do is I'll set up an expiry date of tomorrow. Um, or later on in the week. And basically, on this date, this virtual machine would be marked for deletion, and the next day around 1 a.m. PST, it would be deleted. Also, you have the option of setting up whether this environment or this virtual machine is claimable. Again, the claim pool that we saw, this is where it will start showing up. And you can specify how many instances of this machine do you want created. So maybe you're creating a dev environment for 5 or 6 people in your team, and so you want to spin up 5 machines instead of one. Again, accelerators, all built into the platform of DevTest Labs. Now click OK, and hopefully if all the settings are fine, you see the option of view ARM template. Now behind the scenes, the actual ARM template to provision the virtual machine, selecting the settings that you've just been selecting, has been created for you. The name, the lab, the type of VM, when it's set for expiration, things like the artifacts that you added to it, all of that is right available here. So if you wanted to automate the provisioning of DevTest VMs within DevTest Labs, you don't actually need to come to the Azure portal anymore. You could, in theory, simply copy this ARM definition, take it out into a Git repository, and then through your build pipeline, you could invoke the Azure ARM provider for Microsoft DevTest Labs and provide this template, like we looked at yesterday how we were provisioning the storage account. It would simply provision a new VM for you using the parameters that you've specified. And if you wanted to create separate parameter files for this template, then you could do that as well. So let me just copy this template and take it into GitHub, into the template section, and click Create New File, and simply paste the definition as you've copied it. While that does 90% of the work, there are just 3 more files that you just need to add for this to become a template that will just start showing up as an artifact when you select the provisioning process again. So let's look at what are the other 2 files that you need to add. Let's go back into templates. Now, I've created a folder called IAC Dev Workstation, within which I've added the file that I copied. But in addition to that, you also need to add a metadata.json file, which simply has 3 keywords in there. It's really a wrapper for dev and test labs to look at this and work out, what is the purpose of the template? What is it going to be used for? So when you come to it from the dev test labs, you have some relevant information. And last but not the least, you have to add the parameter file in there. And optionally, you can add a README file, which is more for Git than for dev test labs. For Git, then you can read the README file to figure out what the purpose of this template is. Dev test labs is not going to use it. So if I come back into the Azure portal and I click the Add button now, and it's at this point refreshing the artifacts that are connected to Dev Test Lab. Hopefully, it will detect the template that we've added. And it rightly does so. We've got the IAC workstation template. It just shows up as a separate icon. It's because it's a bespoke template that we're adding. And if I click this, all the configuration values that I had selected when I was initially provisioning the VM, for which it created a parameter in the background. And remember, I defaulted certain values to it as well. They just show up as is. So, the chocolatey package name, and you can, of course, make these, rather than default values, you can make it an array, in which case there will be a drop down here. So at this point, if I say IAC training demo, training, let me call this environment, for example, IAC test environment, and click OK. Enter password. Click add. It's just validating the template now, and now behind the scenes, it's going to kick off the provisioning process for this IAC environment. Pretty neat, right? I mean, just working with the Azure portal to create what you need right from the GUI, generating the ARM definition for you behind the scenes that you can take in your preferred Git hosting solution, whether it's VSTS or GitHub, and then just simply being able to associate that back into the lab as an artifact, and then use that to consume the automation within the provisioning process. And because it's in a Git endpoint, you could attach this with multiple labs, which means work that you're doing for one dev test lab can be carried across to multiple dev test labs with quite a bit of ease. So that was one of the automation aspects that dev test labs provides you. The other thing I wanted to show you, of course, is within the Git repository that I had provisioned, I'd created some more templates. Now, some of the ones that you stumble on a lot is requirements for setting up a web server farm backed by a SQL instance. Now, let me show you what this looks like. This is basically what the template provisions. It's got a couple of NSG rules. It's got its load balancer, some firewall rules in there, some custom network cards, and of course you can layer on artifacts on top of it as well, create your own storage account, so on and so forth. Now, this is a good way of visualizing it, but there is actually an open source tool available that helps you visualize your ARM templates, and it's called ARMViz. It's a designer. If you have used Visio before, then you'll find the interface quite similar. The exception here is that the diagrams that you generate in here actually generate the ARM definition behind the scenes, and vice versa. If you have an ARM template that you give to ARMViz, it will render that as a diagram as well. So it's easier for you to visualize stuff. For example, in this template here, I've got a VM that's got a custom storage account, 2 NIC cards. It's connected to a network that's connected to a load balancer, which is exposed with a public IP address. And I could just click this bit here to see the actual code for it. Now, this integrates with the Azure Quick Start repo as well on GitHub, so you can pick and choose templates from there, visualize them here, amend the definition, and revisualize it. Kind of interactive and easy way to assemble ARM templates. And there is native integration between this and deploy to Azure. So you could visualize it from here and then click to deploy, which takes you back into the portal. And from within the portal, you get the blade from where you could select the parameters and deploy the ARM definition. Okay, so that's effectively some of the automation features available within DevTest Lab. So that template's failed, right? Now, that's a good opportunity to look at how you would diagnose failures within your DevTest Labs. Now, in this case, I can click here and go into the provisioning process. And then when I go into the deployments, it will give me some indications here. At the moment, the deployments are marked as no deployments, which kind of tells me that maybe the provisioning process has failed because of a validation issue within the template. And I can, of course, go into the activity log to start to drill in to figure out, get more details on the set of activities that took place. So as I correctly anticipated, it was the validation process that caused the failure. So, with DevTest Lab, as you work your way through the automation, you might find that it fails sometimes because you've got certain things wrong in the template. But again, the diagnostic capabilities within the tool are good enough to help you work through those issues.